As we get started, for those of you watching on video, I have to address the elephant in the room or the scab on my head, just so you don't think that's a spot. It's like, oh God, Mike didn't shower today. My wife had me go up to our attic yesterday and I smacked my head right into some wood. And so if I'm a little woozy or dumber than normal on this episode, you can blame it on my wife. And for those listening to this, disregard what I just said because you don't see anything on my head. Anyway, in today's episode, I want to talk about priorities. And more specifically, I want to talk about some ways to make sure when you set priorities, when you set goals for your company, for your team, even for yourself, and I'm going to focus more on company and team. How do you make sure you set priorities that are acted upon, that are the right priorities, that are actually going to move you closer to your vision? And most specifically, we're going to talk about 90-day priorities. And I call those 90-day priorities rocks. Now, why do I call them rocks? So some of you have heard the story of the rocks, the pebbles, and the sand. I'll tell a quick version of it for those that haven't heard it. Is if you have some kind of vessel or container that you are putting in, you need to put rocks in, and the metaphor is that rocks are the most important things in your life or the most important things in your business. Pebbles less important. Sand is that trivial stuff we tend to get caught up in. What we tend to do in our businesses and our lives is put the sand in first because they're easier, they're less scary, they take less time. We put the sand in first, then the pebbles. And when we get to the end of the day, there's no room for the rocks. There's no room for what's most important. But if you switch that around, and you put the rocks in first, which means take some time and figure out what's most important first and put those in your life, put those on your schedule, make those priorities. If you put the rocks in first, you're going to fit a lot of rocks in that container. And then the pebbles will fit in, but they'll fall in and around the rocks. And then the sand will fit in, they'll fall in and around the rocks and the pebbles. And if anything doesn't fit, it's the sand. It's some of that sand is not going to fit. And that's the less important, trivial stuff anyway. So rocks are those most important things. And while there's not enough time in the day to do everything, not enough time in the quarter or the year to do everything, there is always time to do what's most important. Those rocks are those most important things. So that's why I call them rocks. Now, why 90 days? Well, the problem with annual priorities, and I believe you ought to be setting annual priorities. If you're at point A, you need to know where point B is, and you ought to be setting, creating a 3-year vision as well, and creating a big, hairy, audacious goal. You're going to do a lot of things that are longer term than 90 days. But 90 days is where stuff gets done. The first reason why it's where stuff gets done is because if you set a 90-day priority, there's a fire up your butt to get it done. There's a sense of urgency. If I say I want to lose 20 pounds over the next year, I'm still going to eat that cupcake later. I'm still going to order a pizza with my son later because I've got plenty of time to lose the 25 pounds. But if you tell me I need to lose 7 pounds this quarter, well, there's a little bit more of a sense of urgency for me to do the right thing now. So a 90-day priority gives it a sense of urgency. The other thing a 90-day priority does is it creates a time frame that is typically short enough that the world is not going to change all that much in 90 days. Now, I hear you. COVID aside, in 90 days, typically the world doesn't change all that much. If I set an annual priority or a 3-year priority, I'm going to stop holding myself and others accountable for that because 3 to 5 months after I created, the world has changed. So a 90-day priority or what we'll call a rock for from here on in is short enough that it is urgent and short enough that the world is not going to change all that much within those 90 days. Now, let's talk about what I call the rock rules, the 10 rules for creating rocks that will really make a difference, will get acted upon, you'll be able to hold yourself and others accountable for. Rule number one, the rock needs to result in a significant improvement to the business, and it's not part of your standard operating procedure. Now, what that really means is that the rock is about working on the business, not in the business. So if you are the sales leader, your rock is not to have 30 sales calls or close 5 deals over the next 90 days. Those absolutely are important for you to do. There are key performance indicators, KPIs, that you ought to be looking at every day, every week, every month, every quarter to make sure you and the team are executing on that. But that's what we call working in the business. To work in the business, the day-to-day, I call that the whirlwind of the day-to-day. You manage those through KPIs. But if all you do is focus on the whirlwind of the day-to-day, you're going to start to fall behind the competition and become irrelevant to your clients, to your employees, to the marketplace. You need to be not only working in the business and closing those new clients or adding more marketing qualified leads or closing your books on time or hitting a certain gross margin number. You need to do all those things, but those are all working in the business, part of the whirlwind of the day-to-day. A rock is about a significant improvement to the business that's not already standard operating procedure. So that's rule number one. Rule number two is your rock should align with your longer term vision, strategy, plan. So if all you do every quarter is say, what's most important this quarter? What should I focus on to work on the business? You may pick some really interesting things that sound great, but where does it get you in the long term if you're not aligned and consistent and moving towards a longer term vision? So the rock you create ought to be ideally a 90-day chunk off of whatever your annual priorities are or your annual plan is. Your annual plan should be a 12-month chunk of your 3-year vision. Your 3-year vision should be a 3-year chunk of your 10 to 15 big, hairy, audacious goal. We need that to be in alignment. So when you create a rock, you should look at that rock and say, does this rock align with our longer term vision? Does it get us closer to realizing our long-term vision? That's rule number two. Rule number three, the rock should be one of the most important 1 to 5 things you should be, you or your team or your company should be working on now. So what that means is if you create 12 rocks, some of them are probably pebbles. Maybe all of them are pebbles. If everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. So when you create a set of rocks, I challenge my clients to make sure there's somewhere, give or take 1 or 2, you've got 3 rocks that are most important for the quarter. 1 is not a bad thing. If you create 1 rock, 1 big priority, some might say, oh, what we need to be doing more than that, but there's nothing wrong with everybody aligning around 1 most important thing. I would argue if you can do that, that's the best way to go. But I do believe if you have any more than 5, you got a bunch of pebbles in there. So that's rule number 3. Rule number 4 is there needs to be clear accountability for each of those rocks you create. Now, what I mean by that, I've talked about accountability in an earlier podcast. Accountability is always and only one person. So I don't care how big that rock is. It may be a boulder that impacts everybody in your company, and maybe dozens of people will be working on it. The people that are working on it are responsible. There needs to be one and only one person accountable for that rock. That one person who's accountable for planning that rock, strategizing around that rock, making sure you've got collaboration of different functions around that rock, measuring whether you're achieving that rock. And when you come around the leadership table, that person accountable is the one who owns whether it is on target or not. And it's the one person the CEO and the leadership team are going to look to say, what's going on? How are you fixing this? What's your plan? How could we help? That's rule number 4. Rule number 5 is that accomplishment of the rock should be within your control, largely within your control. That means the rock shouldn't rely very heavily on economic factors, on regulations, on things that are outside of your control. The best kind of rock is one that is largely within your control. So you don't get a lot of people around that leadership table playing the victim, saying, well, we were assuming a great economy and here's what's happened. You need to make sure that to a large degree, and I keep saying to a large degree because it's an argument that says, hey, nothing is ever totally within our control other than our own attitude and our own behavior. And as much as you've got the right attitude and the right behavior, maybe you won't get the result you're looking for in that quarter. That's true, but it needs to be largely within your control, or you wind up with a whole bunch of excuses rather than results. Rock rule number 6 is that the rock should be significant enough that it's going to take the better part of a quarter to complete, or it's part of a longer effort. And this rock is about what you're going to get done this quarter. The rock, I don't care how important it is. If the rock is about calling someone next week, you're thinking too small. The rock is going to get done in 3 weeks. You may be thinking too small. Now, does everything magically happen in a quarter, in 3 months? Of course not. But you want to make sure it's a significant chunk of work that's going to take you a quarter or the better part of a quarter to get done. Or again, it might be part of a longer effort, but you want to know what the finish line is for that quarter, which kind of leads us to rock number 7, is each rock should have a crystal clear finish line for the end of the quarter with methods to measure progress over the quarter. So what do I mean by that? A rock is not, this quarter, we're going to improve our communication. This quarter, we're going to get better at coaching our people. None of those things have a clear measure of success. Instead of saying that, we're going to get better at coaching our people, maybe it's going to improve our talent density from X to Y. What is that clear measure of success at the end of the quarter that you and others on the team could be held accountable for? There also needs to be ways to measure progress over time. So it's not effective to have a rock where we don't know until the end of the quarter how we're doing. You get together in your weekly accountability meetings and it's like, well, I'm hoping it gets done. I'll let you know at the end of the quarter, or I'm on track, I think, and no one has a way to hold you or others accountable for it being on track. There need to be clear measures of success throughout the quarter with some red, yellow, green tracking on that. So we know whether you're on target or not. So here's where I need to be at the end of week 3. Here's where I need to be at the end of week 5, week 9, and here's where I need to be at the end of the quarter. So clear finish line with measures of success. Number 8 is there should be some kind of tool you're using to measure that success, to input those plans. In a quarterly planning meeting, you may be putting all these things up on flip charts, but it's not good enough to say, how are we doing on that rock? Well, let's go back to the flip chart. It's also not good enough when you are holding people accountable for people to just tell you everything they've done or not done with any visibility to that plan. So whether it's a spreadsheet or it's some application you use, a lot of my clients use something called metronome growth systems. That's great. But you should be using some kind of tool so you can see these rocks in front of you, have visibility during a weekly meeting, a monthly meeting, a quarterly meeting, so you could manage this stuff by exception, depending on the reds, yellows, and greens. So that was rule number 8. Rule number 9, and this is often the toughest one to make happen, certainly early on, is rocks should be outcome driven rather than task driven. Now, what does that mean? Great example is if you have a rock that says this quarter, we are going to plan and design our leadership development program. That's a task-driven rock. What you're doing is saying, we're going to get these tasks done. We're going to plan, we're going to develop our leadership development program. Well, the question I'd ask for any rock that's task-driven is it possible that you complete that rock, that you do plan and develop a leadership development program, but it adds no value? And the initial answer I get normally is, no, of course it'll add value. But if we realistically look at it, you could plan and develop a program that's not very helpful, but you check the boxes, you've planned and developed a program, but it adds no value. You could plan and develop what you think is a wonderful program, but no one participates. You can get people participating, but they're not taking action on it because maybe they're not getting the support from above. I've seen too many rocks like that cause people to work their butts off to get it done, and then it adds no value. So how could you make that rock outcome driven? Well, very simply, what's the outcome you're looking to achieve through this leadership development program? And maybe you say, well, it's a big program. We're not going to see outcomes for 9, 12 months until people have gone through this and it's taken some time. Well, frankly, I don't think that's good enough. I think you need to take a more agile approach and add value quarter after quarter after quarter. So the outcome you might be looking for is we want to, I don't know, improve our talent density throughout the organization, increase our percent of A players, decrease our percent of C players. What I would ask, how could you impact that within a quarter? And instead of planning and developing this massive program that may or may not add real value, can you execute on a sliver of a program around helping people do a better job of assessing talent and then coaching that talent? Could you execute on a sliver of it that may ultimately become part of a bigger program, but you're adding value now? So challenge yourself, challenge others. How can you make sure that rock is outcome driven, where that finish line is a measurable piece of value versus I've planned something? To me, having the word plan in a rock is like fingernails on a blackboard. So that was rule number 9. And then rule number 10 is, and I've alluded to this throughout, is team members need to be regularly held accountable for progress on those rocks. I think weekly is a great way to do that. You can, in a quarterly planning meeting, which is normally where these rocks get created, you can create a wonderful set of 3 rocks with accountabilities, and people come up with plans and they put it in a beautiful system, Excel or Metronome Growth Systems or Microsoft Teams or Google Docs, wherever they're putting it. If you're not holding them accountable every week, people stop taking them seriously. You get to the end of the quarter and say, "How did we do?" And people go, "Could you remind me what my rock was again? I don't remember." So you need a way weekly, and I believe that accountability lives or dies with the weekly accountability meeting. Notice I don't call it a weekly status meeting. In an early episode called The Dreaded Weekly Meeting, I talk about the difference between a status meeting and an accountability meeting. So I'm not going to go into it here, but you need a way weekly, not just to say, "Hey, what do you have going on? Hey, what do you have going on?" But people are accountable for rocks. You need a way to hold them accountable in that weekly meeting for those milestones, for making progress about that outcome, making progress towards that outcome. So 10 rules really quickly. It results in significant improvement to the business. That was number one. Number two, it aligns with the longer term plan and vision. Number three, it's one of the most important 1 to 5 things you should be working on now. Number four, there's clear accountability for the rock. Number five, accomplishment of the rock is largely within your control. Number six, it's a significant chunk of work that's going to take the better part of a month to get done, or it may be part of a longer term project or initiative. 7, there's a clear finish line with milestones and methods to measure progress. Number 8, you should use some kind of tool to track and measure your rock plans and your progress against those plans. Number 9, it is outcome rather than task driven. And number 10, team members are regularly, I think weekly, held accountable for progress on their rocks. So do this. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good here. If you've got rocks that are task driven, but not outcome driven, don't let that stop the process. It's okay if some of them are task driven and not outcome driven. Move forward, get the process started, make it a habit, and then improve it as you go.